He noticed the danger before he noticed her face. A man was watching from the far end of the room, still enough to pretend he belonged there, close enough to make every instinct in a single father's body start screaming. For a split second, he considered doing what he had trained himself to do for years. Look
Can you pass
away,
the syrup, please?
keep
I know, I
his
told her the same thing
child
yesterday.
close, and stay out of
This
trouble.
coffee is great.
Then the woman lifted her hands, trembling, forming words no one else seemed able to
What's wrong, Daddy? Why do you
understand.
look so sad?
It's gonna
He
be
was
okay,
a single
sweetheart, I
dad
promise.
who had learned to survive by shrinking his world to one safe routine, one small hand in his own, and one rule above all others: never get involved. Life had taught him that stepping in came with costs, and he already paid more than most men could afford. That evening was supposed to be simple, forgettable, just another quiet stop before bedtime stories and brushed teeth. But the silence around the woman felt wrong, heavier than noise, heavier than fear. People glanced at her and turned away, mistaking urgency for discomfort, difference for inconvenience. He recognized the movements of her hands instantly, a language he had not used in years, but never truly forgotten. In that moment, he understood something no one else did. She was asking for help, and time was running out. The child beside him sensed the shift and tightened her grip, eyes searching his face for answers. He realized that whatever choice he made next would follow them long after this night was over. Helping her could unravel the fragile stability he had built for his family. Ignoring her would teach his child a lesson he was not willing to live with. So he stood up, not as a hero, but as a father who knew that some moments decide who you are. He used to believe that staying invisible was a kind of discipline, not cowardice, not indifference, discipline. The kind a man learned after life punished him for stepping forward too many times, after responsibility narrowed his vision until only one thing remained worth protecting: his daughter. Every evening followed the same carefully constructed pattern. Predictability was safety. He parked in the same row, locked the car twice, counted the steps to the entrance, kept his daughter on his left side, so his right hand stayed free. He always scanned exits before sitting down. He always chose a seat with a wall behind him. These habits were not paranoia, they were muscle memory, built during the years when chaos had taught him what unpredictability could steal. That night should have been no different. The place was ordinary, too ordinary to be memorable. Fluorescent lights hummed softly. People moved with the distracted rhythm of those thinking about dinner, deadlines, and phones buzzing in their pockets. It was the kind of public space where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen, where everyone trusted that someone else would intervene if it did. He had once trusted that too. He helped his daughter onto the chair, adjusted her jacket, and handed her the small puzzle book she liked. She immediately bent over it, tongue peeking out in concentration, the way she always did when she felt safe enough to disappear into her own world. Watching her like this was the closest he ever came to peace. That was when he noticed the stillness, not silent stillness, the kind that doesn't belong in places meant for motion. A woman stood several steps away near the edge of the room, her posture rigid, her shoulders held too high as if bracing against something invisible. People flowed around her without slowing, like water around a rock. At first, he did what he had trained himself to do. He looked away. There was a time in his life when he couldn't do that, when every raised voice, every tense exchange felt like a personal responsibility. He had stepped into arguments that weren't his, defended strangers who never asked, believed naively that doing the right thing always made things right. It had not. The cost of that belief now sat across from him, swinging her legs gently beneath the table, unaware of how tightly he controlled the world around her. He reminded himself of the rules he lived by now. Don't draw attention, don't escalate, don't put your child in the path of other people's storms. He focused on his daughter again, asked her about her puzzle, smiled when she proudly showed him a row she had completed. He was almost successful in convincing himself that the knot in his chest was nothing more than old instinct misfiring. Then the woman lifted her hands. The movement was small at first, tentative, as if she were testing whether it was safe to exist. Her fingers shaped something precise, deliberate, completely at odds with the panic written across her face. She repeated the motion faster this time, her eyes darting toward the room, searching. No one responded. A man nearby frowned, then turned his chair slightly away. A woman glanced up, hesitated, then looked back down at her phone. Someone sighed, annoyed, as if the woman's presence were an inconvenience rather than a warning. The single dad felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew that language. He hadn't used it in years, not since his life split cleanly into before and after, but it lived in him the way certain memories do, dormant but intact. The angles of the wrists, the urgency in the repetition, the way her hands trembled, not from uncertainty but from restraint. She wasn't asking a question, she was asking for help. His first instinct was to pretend he hadn't seen it. That thought shamed him more than he expected. He told himself the same lies people always tell when they're about to walk away. Someone else will notice. Maybe she's fine. You don't know the whole story. Each justification stacked neatly on top of the last, forming a wall he could hide behind. But another part of him, older, quieter, harder to silence, was counting details. The way her gaze flicked repeatedly toward the entrance, the way she positioned herself so she could see it at all times, the way her breathing was shallow, controlled, as if she were trying not to panic. This wasn't confusion, this was fear with nowhere to go. His daughter looked up then, sensing the change in him the way children always do. Her small hand reached for his sleeve, grounding him, reminding him of the equation that governed his entire existence. Her safety above everything. He leaned closer to her, lowering his voice. Finish that page, okay? I'm right here. He wasn't lying. He didn't move yet. The woman's hands stilled for a moment, then started again, more urgently now. Her eyes met his just briefly, but in that instant, something passed between them that had nothing to do with language. Recognition. She saw it in his face, the flicker of understanding, the almost imperceptible shift in posture that said, "You see me." Hope surged there, fragile and dangerous. That was the moment he knew he was already involved, because now there were only two choices left, and both of them carried weight. If he stood up, he risked drawing attention, risked misreading the situation, risked being wrong. He risked pulling his daughter into something unpredictable, something he had sworn never to do again. If he stayed seated, he would teach his daughter something without meaning to. That understanding was optional. That silence was safer than courage. That it was acceptable to watch someone ask for help and decide it wasn't your problem. He thought about the nights he had lain awake after becoming a father, staring at the ceiling, promising himself he would raise a child who knew the difference between caution and fear. The woman's hands faltered, her shoulders sagged slightly, as if the effort of being seen without being answered had finally begun to wear her down. Around her, the room continued as if nothing was happening at all. He felt the old anger rise then. Not sharp, not explosive, but heavy and familiar. The anger of knowing how easily people disappeared when they didn't fit neatly into the noise of the world. He stood up slowly, not abruptly, not dramatically. He moved the way he did everything now, with care. He placed himself between his daughter and the open space of the room, instinctively shielding her even as he stepped forward. The woman noticed immediately. Her eyes widened, her hands freezing mid-motion, as if afraid that one wrong gesture would break the moment. He raised his hands in response, keeping his movements calm, deliberate. "I see you." Her breath caught. Relief flooded her face so fast it almost looked like pain. Behind him, his daughter slid off her chair and pressed against his leg, peeking out with curious eyes. He felt the slight tremor in her fingers and rested his hand on her head, steadying both of them. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. He had broken the rule he had lived by for years. He had chosen involvement over distance, uncertainty over safety, as he understood it. But as he looked at the woman, really looked at her, standing alone in a room full of people who had decided not to understand, he knew something else too. This wasn't about being brave. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about refusing to become someone his daughter would one day be ashamed to remember. And in that moment, before a single word was exchanged, before consequences could even begin to unfold, the single dad understood a truth that would reshape everything that came after. Some choices don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive quietly, disguised as hesitation, and ask only one question: will you look away or will you stay? He did not ask her to explain everything at once. He knew better than that. When fear narrows a person's world, clarity comes in fragments, not full sentences. He lifted his hands again, slower this time, grounding the space between them. Breathe. I understand. Take your time. The woman swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked past him toward the entrance, then back to his face. Whatever she had been holding inside finally broke free, not in a rush, but in a careful, controlled release, like someone opening a door only as wide as necessary. They are looking for me. The movement of her fingers was sharp, economical, no wasted motion. He felt the meaning land heavy in his chest. Who? He signed. She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. Not one person. More than one. Her hands moved again. I didn't choose this. I tried to leave. His jaw tightened. Around them, the room continued its low hum of normalcy. Someone laughed at something on their phone. A chair scraped against the floor. Life moved forward, ignorant of the quiet emergency unfolding in its midst. His daughter shifted beside him, her small body pressing closer. She watched the woman with wide eyes, not afraid, just curious in that way children are, when they sense importance but don't yet know its shape. He crouched slightly, lowering himself so he could keep eye contact with both of them. He signed with one hand now, the other resting lightly on his daughter's shoulder. Are you hurt? The woman shook her head. Not yet. That word, yet, echoed louder than any scream. They followed me here, she continued. I thought public meant safe. He had thought that once too. He scanned the room again, more carefully this time, letting his instincts take over. He didn't look for someone obvious. People who meant harm rarely announced themselves. Instead, he watched for the subtle things. The man standing too close to the exit, pretending to scroll but never typing. The woman near the window who hadn't ordered anything in 15 minutes. The way certain gazes lingered just a second longer than coincidence allowed. He felt it then. The slow, sinking certainty. She was right. Whatever she was running from hadn't stopped at the door. He signed again, keeping his movements steady despite the sudden acceleration of his thoughts. Do they know you're here? Her answer came immediately. Yes. His daughter tugged gently on his sleeve. Daddy? He looked down at her. She wasn't scared, not yet, but she was perceptive enough to know something was wrong. We're helping someone, he said softly. You're okay. Stay close to me. She nodded, trusting him in that absolute way that both strengthened and terrified him. He turned back to the woman. We need to move, he signed, but not quickly. Her eyes widened. If I move, they follow. He nodded. He had already anticipated that. Then we don't move like we're running, he replied. We move like we belong. He guided her, not touching, not grabbing, just positioning himself so the three of them formed a unit rather than three separate targets. He chose a spot near the center of the room, visible from multiple angles, where isolation would be difficult. This was the part he hated most, the part where thinking ahead meant assuming the worst. He signed again. Is there anyone you trust I can call? She shook her head, then paused. Her hands rose slowly. My phone is gone. A mistake, he realized. Or not a mistake, maybe a necessity. Maybe she had learned the hard way that technology could be tracked as easily as footsteps. Okay, he signed. Then we do this together. Her shoulders trembled, the smallest crack in her composure finally showing. She nodded. For a moment, he felt the weight of the years pressing down on him. The years since he had last been in a situation where other people's danger intersected with his own life. The years he had spent building walls instead of bridges. He hadn't planned on tearing them down tonight. He leaned slightly toward his daughter. Sweetheart, he murmured, I need you to do something very important for me. Her eyes lit up at the word important. I need you to sit right here and finish your puzzle. Can you do that? She glanced between him and the woman, then nodded solemnly. I can. He smiled, a real one this time. Good. You're helping. Children liked being useful. He hoped she would never understand just how much. He straightened and caught the eye of an employee across the room. Not with panic, with intention, the kind of look that said, pay attention. The employee frowned, then followed his gaze to the woman, to the way she stood slightly too rigid, to the way he positioned himself just a fraction closer than strangers usually did. Recognition flickered there, too. Good. He signed again. Tell me why they're looking for you. The woman hesitated, then began. Her story didn't come out cleanly. It came in pieces. Broken timelines, half explanations shaped by exhaustion rather than logic. But the shape of it was unmistakable. She had been pressured, cornered, promised safety in exchange for compliance she never intended to give. When she refused, when she tried to disappear quietly, the tone changed. Politeness gave way to threat. She wasn't being hunted because she was weak. She was being hunted because she had said no. He felt something harden inside him at that. They think I don't matter, she signed finally. They think no one will notice. He thought of all the people who had already proven her right. I notice, he replied. It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact. He looked around again, this time deliberately catching the gaze of the man near the exit. The man looked away too quickly. Confirmation settled into his bones. He was no longer guessing. We need help, he signed, but not loudly. Her hands trembled. If police come, he raised a hand gently. I know. Whatever she was afraid of ran deeper than the immediate threat. He didn't push. Instead, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He sat down, not away from her, with her. He pulled a chair close, creating a circle instead of a barrier. He wanted anyone watching to see exactly what he wanted them to see. Nothing urgent, nothing unusual, nothing worth reacting to. The woman blinked, confused. Trust me, he signed. She did. He felt it in the way her shoulders lowered just a fraction, in the way her breathing slowed to match his. This was when he realized it fully, not as a fear, but as a responsibility. He wasn't just the only one who understood her language. He was the only one in the room who understood the situation. And that meant there was no one else to hand this off to. No convenient authority figure to step in before things escalated. No invisible safety net waiting just out of sight. The choice he had made when he stood up had already rippled outward. It had made him visible to people who did not want witnesses. He thought of his daughter again, of the life he had carefully protected from exactly this kind of unpredictability. And still, he did not regret it, because regret, he knew, was a quieter danger, one that lingered long after the moment passed. The woman met his eyes again, searching his face for something he couldn't name. Why are you helping me? She signed. The question caught him off guard. He considered lying, something simple, something noble, but he signed the truth instead, because one day he replied, "My daughter will grow up, and I want her to believe that when people ask for help, someone listens." The woman's lips pressed together, her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded, as if storing the answer somewhere safe. Across the room, movement shifted. The man near the exit checked his phone again. The woman by the window stood, then sat back down, time compressed. The single dad felt the tension coil tighter, every instinct screaming that the quiet couldn't last much longer. And for the first time since he had chosen to get involved, he allowed himself to think the thought he had been avoiding. This may not end cleanly. But as he looked at the two people depending on him, the woman who had trusted him with her fear and the child who trusted him with her entire world, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever happened next, he would not abandon either of them. And somewhere in the space between understanding and action, the single dad crossed another invisible line. From witness to participant to protector. Children notice what adults train themselves to ignore. The single dad understood this long before that night. He had seen it in the way his daughter picked up on moods before words were spoken, and how she sensed tension the moment it entered a room. While adults learned to rationalize discomfort, children responded to it honestly, without the protective layers of denial. She felt it now. He could tell by the way her small fingers curled into the fabric of his jacket, not clutching, not trembling, just anchoring herself. She watched the woman across from them with quiet intensity, her head tilted slightly, as if trying to solve a puzzle no book had prepared her for. The woman noticed her too. At first, her gaze avoided the child entirely, as if afraid of what seeing innocence up close might undo. Then slowly, almost involuntarily, her eyes softened. Something in her posture shifted. Not relief, not safety, but recognition. The presence of a child changed the shape of danger. It made everything more fragile, more real. The single dad saw that moment and made a calculated choice. He lowered himself into the chair beside his daughter and gently guided her closer, creating a small triangle between the three of them, not as a shield, but as a statement. We are together. "Daddy," his daughter whispered, careful not to draw attention. "Is she sad?" He paused. There were many ways to answer that question, some simpler than others, some safer. "She's scared," he said finally, "but she's being very brave." His daughter considered this. Then, without waiting for permission, she slid off her chair and walked the few steps toward the woman. The movement was slow, deliberate, unthreatening. Before he could stop her, before he could even decide whether he should, she extended her hand, not to touch, just to offer. The room seemed to hold its breath. The woman froze. Her eyes widened, her hands lifting instinctively before stopping midair, uncertain. The language she relied on did not include moments like this. Fear did not prepare you for kindness. Trauma did not teach you how to accept gentleness without suspicion. The child didn't withdraw. She simply waited. The single dad felt a sharp spike of panic, followed immediately by something else. Pride, tangled with fear, tangled with trust. He did not rush forward. He did not call her back. He stayed where he was, ready, but allowing the moment to unfold. Slowly, the woman knelt to the child's level. Their eyes met. The child smiled. Not wide, not exuberant, just enough to communicate safety. Then she did something that required no translation at all. She pulled a small crayon from her pocket, one she carried everywhere, and held it out. The woman stared at it as if it were something impossibly precious. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single exchange. Then the woman accepted it. Her fingers closed around the crayon, trembling. She exhaled a breath she had been holding for far too long. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her expression had changed. The sharp edge of panic had softened into something quieter, something steadier. Hope, perhaps. or the memory of it. The single dad felt the tension in the room shift, not disappear, but redistribute. The people nearby noticed it too, even if they didn't understand why. A few glances lingered longer now. Someone moved closer under the pretense of adjusting a chair. Awareness spread in small, almost imperceptible waves. The child returned to her seat, satisfied, as if she had completed an important task. She leaned against her father's side, whispering, "She likes purple." He smiled faintly. "I think you're right." The woman lifted her hands again, slower now, steadier. She signed to him, her movements gentler than before. "Thank you." He shook his head slightly. "You don't need to thank us." Her gaze flicked to the child. "She reminds me." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The single dad understood something then that he hadn't fully grasped before. His daughter wasn't just present, she was changing the dynamic. Predators relied on isolation, on fear that shrank people inward, on chaos that made others look away. But a child, open, curious, unguarded, disrupted that pattern. She drew attention not through alarm but through humanity. The danger didn't vanish, but it hesitated. He noticed movement near the edge of the room again. The man by the exit shifted his weight, glancing toward the woman, then toward the child. His jaw tightened. His posture changed. The certainty he had carried earlier now wavered. Witnesses complicated things. Children complicated things even more. The single dad leaned closer to the woman, keeping his voice low, even though she couldn't hear it. His hand spoke instead. "Stay close to us," he signed. "Not because you're weak, because together is harder to ignore." She nodded. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. The child grew restless, swinging her legs again, humming softly to herself. The sound, small, innocent, unbothered, cut through the tension like light through fog. The woman watched her, mesmerized, as if trying to memorize the moment. The single dad watched both of them. He realized something unsettling and profound. This wasn't just about protecting the woman. This was about protecting the version of the world his daughter was learning how to navigate. Every choice he made tonight was teaching her something about fear, about responsibility, about the kind of adult she could become. He had spent years trying to shield her from harm. Now he understood that shielding wasn't enough. He had to show her how to stand. A voice broke the quiet. "Is everything okay over here?" An employee had finally approached, cautious but attentive. The single dad met their eyes and nodded slowly. "Not yet," he said calmly, "but it will be." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The woman signed again, this time to both of them. "I didn't think anyone would stay." The child looked up at her father. "Daddy, are we staying?" He answered without hesitation. "Yes." The woman's hands trembled, then steadied. She straightened her back, lifting her chin just slightly. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was resolve. And in that moment, the single dad understood the truth of it. He wasn't the only one holding things together. The child was, not by understanding the danger, not by knowing the stakes, but by doing what adults often forget to do when fear enters the room, by reaching out instead of retreating. The room no longer felt like a place where something bad was about to happen. It felt like a place where something irreversible had already occurred. Connection. And whatever consequences followed, the single dad knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night would stay with his daughter forever, not as a memory of fear, but as a memory of choice. The first consequence arrived quietly. It did not come with raised voices or sudden movement. It came in the form of awareness, sharp, collective, unavoidable. The room no longer pretended nothing was happening. Eyes lingered. Conversations thinned. The casual anonymity of public space dissolved into something watchful. The single dad felt it immediately. He had been invisible for a long time by choice. Now, by stepping in, he had made himself visible in ways that could not be reversed. People were noticing not just the woman, but him, his posture, his positioning, the way he never fully turned his back on the entrance. He had changed the temperature of the room. The employee who had approached earlier did not leave this time. She stayed nearby, pretending to wipe down a counter that did not need cleaning. Another staff member drifted closer, glancing between the door and the small group at the center. Help was forming, but slowly, cautiously, the way people move when they sense risk but don't yet understand it. The woman noticed too. Her hands lifted again, her movements sharper now, edged with urgency. They're getting nervous, she signed. That's when they act. The single dad nodded. He had been waiting for this phase. Predators tolerated witnesses only as long as those witnesses remained uncertain. Once attention solidified, the calculation changed. Retreat became as likely as escalation. Neither option was comforting. He shifted slightly, placing himself in a way that blocked a direct line of sight between the woman and the entrance. His daughter remained close, her body warm against his side. She was quieter now, sensing that playtime had ended, though she didn't fully understand why. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we going home soon?" The question landed heavier than she intended. He brushed her hair back gently. "Soon," he said, "but not yet." The truth was, he had no idea what soon meant anymore. The second consequence arrived faster. The man near the exit moved, not abruptly, never abruptly. He took a few casual steps forward, then stopped as if reconsidering. His gaze locked onto the woman, then flicked to the child, then back to the single dad. A silent exchange passed between them. Assessment, risk, decision. The single dad felt his pulse quicken, but his face remained calm. Panic, he knew, invited mistakes. He stood slowly, keeping one hand on his daughter's shoulder, the other relaxed at his side. He did not advance, he did not retreat. He simply made it clear that any path forward would have to go through him. The man's eyes narrowed. Around them, the room had grown almost painfully quiet. This was the moment when things could break. The woman's hands shook violently now. "I didn't want this," she signed. "I didn't want anyone else hurt." The single dad met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "You didn't cause this," he replied. "You exposed it." That distinction mattered. The man near the exit cursed under his breath, softly, but loud enough for intent to leak through. He took another step. Before the single dad could react, a voice rang out. "Sir?" Firm, clear, unafraid. One of the employees had stepped forward, phone already in hand. "I've called this in. Please step back." The man froze. For a split second, the single dad thought it might still escalate. That pride or desperation might override logic. But something else happened instead. The man laughed. A short, humorless sound. He lifted his hands in mock surrender, backing away slowly. "You're all overreacting," he said, "just waiting for someone." No one believed him. Not anymore. The woman sagged slightly, relief and exhaustion colliding inside her. The single dad shifted closer, steadying her without touching, offering presence instead of support she hadn't asked for. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. The third consequence arrived then, heavier than the first two. There would be questions, statements, time, records. There would be follow-up, attention, inconvenience. There would be nights when his daughter asked why strangers now knew their names, why routines changed, why he sometimes stared out the window longer than before. There would be moments when he wondered, honestly, painfully, whether stepping in had made their lives harder. He acknowledged all of it, and still he did not regret it. When the authorities arrived, the room exhaled collectively. Tension released in uneven waves. People spoke at once, eager to explain, eager to distance themselves from the fear they had sensed but not named. The single dad kept his focus narrow. He translated when asked, clarified when needed. He did not embellish, he did not dramatize. He let the truth stand on its own, solid and undeniable. The woman spoke too, not with words, but with composure. Her fear was still there, but it no longer owned her movements. She stood upright now, eyes forward, hands steady. She was not hiding anymore. That was another consequence. Visibility cut both ways. After it was over, after statements were taken, after reassurance was offered, after the room slowly returned to something resembling normal, the single dad felt the exhaustion crash into him all at once. Adrenaline faded, leaving behind weight. He gathered his daughter's things, movement slower now. She yawned, leaning into him, her earlier vigilance finally giving way to sleepiness. As they prepared to leave, the woman turned to him. Her hands moved carefully, deliberately. "You didn't have to do this," she signed. "You had a child to protect." He looked down at his daughter, then back at her. "I did protect her," he replied. She searched his face as if trying to understand. "By protecting you," he added. Her breath caught. They stood there for a moment longer, bound by an experience that neither had sought, but both would carry. Then she signed one final thing. "I won't forget this." He nodded. "Neither will I." They walked out separately. That was important. No promises, no dramatic declarations, just the quiet acknowledgement that lives had intersected and diverged, changed by the contact. Outside, the night air felt cooler, sharper. The single dad buckled his daughter into her seat, watching her eyes flutter closed almost instantly. As he closed the door, he caught his reflection in the glass. He looked different, not braver, not stronger, just more awake. The final consequence arrived later, when the world had quieted and his daughter slept peacefully in her bed. He sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug long gone cold, replaying the night in fragments, the hesitation, the choice, the moment everything tipped. He realized something then that unsettled him more than danger ever had. Avoiding involvement had not kept his life simple. It had kept it small. And now, having stepped beyond that boundary, he knew there was no unlearning what he had learned tonight. Some lines once crossed could not be uncrossed. Some versions of yourself once revealed refused to disappear. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed understanding when no one else could. For the first time in years, he did not pull away from the weight of what he felt. He accepted it. And in doing so, the single dad took the first step towards something he had not known he needed. Not control, not safety, but connection. The hardest part came later. Not that night, not in the moment when adrenaline burned through his veins and instinct took over. Not even in the days that followed, when routines were disrupted and questions lingered like dust that refused to settle. The hardest part came when things were quiet again. When his daughter returned to her normal rhythms, school mornings, mismatched socks, bedtime stories read twice because she liked to interrupt with questions, when the house settled back into its familiar stillness, when there was no immediate danger demanding his attention, that was when the weight returned. He had spent years convincing himself that handling everything alone was not just necessary, but virtuous. That self-reliance was the highest form of responsibility, that asking for help was a luxury he could no longer afford after becoming a single father. He had learned that lesson well, too well. The night he stepped in had cracked something open, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that the old structure no longer held the same way. He found himself replaying moments he would once have dismissed, the look on the employee's face when she stepped forward, the subtle coordination between strangers who decided almost unconsciously to watch out for one another, the way his daughter had moved without fear, trusting that the adults around her would catch her if she fell. He had not done everything alone, and that realization unsettled him. In the days that followed, he tried to return to normal. He told himself that the incident was over, that it had been a singular event, an exception, not a turning point. But normal resisted him. Small cracks appeared where certainty used to live. He forgot to pick up groceries one evening, and instead of improvising silently, he accepted his neighbor's offer of dinner without protest. He let a colleague cover a shift he would normally have forced himself to work through. When his daughter's teacher asked if everything was okay at home, he paused instead of replying automatically with yes. These were not dramatic changes, but they terrified him because each one required him to admit something he had spent years denying, that he could not in fact be everything all the time, that strength did not always look like endurance, that sometimes it looked like letting someone else carry part of the load. The woman reached out a week later, not in person, not with urgency, just a short message delivered through a mutual contact who had helped facilitate communication. I wanted you to know I'm safe. He read it twice. Relief washed through him, followed quickly by something more complicated. Responsibility? Attachment? He wasn't sure. He only knew that her safety mattered to him in a way he had not anticipated. He did not reply immediately. That was his instinct. To delay, to distance, to avoid opening doors he might not be able to close. He had built his life around minimizing variables. New connections were variables, unpredictable, risky. That night, his daughter asked him a question he wasn't prepared for. "Daddy," she said as he tucked her in, "is the lady okay?" He froze, hand still resting on the blanket. "Yes," he said carefully. "She's okay." His daughter smiled, satisfied. "Good. I was worried." He studied her face in the dim light. Children worried openly, he realized. They did not hide concern behind logic or justification. They did not ration empathy. She turned onto her side, already drifting toward sleep. "You did the right thing," she murmured. The words landed softly, but they stayed. He replied to the woman the next morning, "I'm glad you're safe." That was all. No questions, no expectations. Her response came hours later. "I didn't do it alone." He stared at the message for a long time. He understood then that this wasn't just her update. It was an invitation, not to rescue, not to fix, but to acknowledge something fundamental. That survival was not a solo act. They met again weeks later in a setting deliberately chosen for its neutrality. Not the place where everything had gone wrong, somewhere quieter, less charged, somewhere that allowed for distance as well as proximity. She looked different, not healed. He was careful not to romanticize recovery, but steadier. Her posture was more grounded, her movements less defensive. She carried herself like someone who had made choices rather than endured them. He noticed that immediately, and she noticed his hesitation. "You don't have to stay long," she signed early on, reading him with unnerving accuracy. "I know you have a life." He nodded. He did, and yet he stayed. At first he framed it as caution, as ensuring closure, as verifying that things truly were resolved. But as time passed, those explanations rang hollow even to his own ears. What he was really doing was learning how to be present without being in control. She spoke about therapy, about support systems she had once avoided out of pride or fear or simple exhaustion, about how difficult it had been to admit that strength did not mean isolation. He listened, and in listening, he recognized himself in her words more than he was comfortable with. She never thanked him again. That mattered, because gratitude implied debt, and she was no longer in a position of owing anyone her survival. She spoke instead about choices she was making, where to live, what boundaries to set, how to rebuild on her own terms. He admired that. It made it easier to loosen his grip on the role he had instinctively assumed that night. Protector, intermediary, anchor. He did not need to be those things anymore. What surprised him most was how difficult that realization was to accept. Letting go of responsibility felt like failure, even when it wasn't his responsibility to begin with. He had tied his identity so tightly to being needed that the idea of being optional unsettled him. He took that discomfort with him into therapy, something he had avoided for years under the guise of being fine. "I don't know how to stop carrying everything," he admitted one session, the words tasting unfamiliar in his mouth. The therapist did not rush to reassure him. She simply asked, "What would happen if you didn't?" He had no answer. That night he told his daughter he was tired, not busy, not stressed, not fine, just tired. She climbed into his lap without comment, wrapping her arms around him with the easy confidence of someone who believed comfort was a shared resource. "You can rest," she said simply. He closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he did. Receiving help did not come all at once. It came in fragments, in moments of surrender that felt small but accumulated over time, in choosing not to fill every silence, in trusting that the world would not collapse if he set something down. The woman did not need him to save her, and his daughter did not need him to be invincible. What they both needed, what he needed, was presence unburdened by control. That was the hardest lesson of all, and the most liberating. For a long time, she believed survival was something that happened to other people, the kind of people with louder voices, quicker instincts, stronger bodies, people whose fear announced itself and demanded attention. Her fear had always been quieter, folded inward, shaped by years of learning how to exist in a world that moved too fast and listened too little. When the danger finally came for her, it did not feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. That was the lie she had lived with. In the weeks after that night, she worked deliberately to dismantle it. Recovery did not look the way stories suggested it should. There was no sudden clarity, no single moment where everything snapped back into place. Healing, she learned, was not an upward line but a landscape, uneven, unpredictable, filled with moments of progress followed by unexpected setbacks. She began with the practical things: paperwork, appointments, conversations she dreaded but knew she could no longer avoid. She sat in offices that smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee, watching hands move in front of her. Interpreters, advocates, professionals, people whose job it was to listen when the world would not. Each meeting reminded her of something important. She was not alone anymore, not because someone had rescued her, but because she had chosen to step into spaces where help existed. That choice did not erase the fear, but it changed her relationship to it. She learned the language of boundaries the same way she had learned everything else. Slowly, through repetition, through mistakes, she practiced saying no without apology, practiced leaving rooms when her chest tightened instead of forcing herself to stay, practiced trusting her instincts again after years of questioning them. Some days, the weight of it all pressed so heavily on her that she struggled to get out of bed. On those days, she reminded herself that standing did not always mean moving forward. Sometimes it meant not falling back. She thought often about the single dad, not with longing, not with dependence, but with gratitude that did not demand repayment. He existed in her memory, not as a savior, but as a witness, someone who had seen her fear clearly and responded without trying to own it. That distinction mattered more than she could explain. When they met again, she made a conscious choice. She would not minimize herself to make him comfortable. She would not perform gratitude to justify his involvement. She would not shrink into the version of herself that had once survived by disappearing. She showed up as she was, unsteady, honest, still figuring things out. And when she noticed his hesitation, the way he held himself as if bracing for responsibility that no longer belonged to him, she named it gently. "I don't need you to carry this," she signed. "I just need you to see me." He did, And that was enough. Their conversation shifted over time, less about what had happened, more about what was happening, about choices, about futures that were no longer defined solely by avoidance. She spoke about things she wanted, not desperately, not as compensation for trauma, but with a quiet certainty that surprised even her. Stability, autonomy, work that felt meaningful, a life where silence did not mean absence, but space. She noticed how carefully he listened, not to fix, not to intervene, just to understand. That too was part of her healing, being heard without being handled. The night she realized she had truly changed came unexpectedly. She was walking alone, not far, not late, but alone nonetheless. The air was cool, the street familiar. A year ago, the simple act would have left her heart racing, senses overloaded, fear dictating every step. This time she noticed the soundless rhythm of her movement instead, the way her feet met the pavement, the way the world unfolded visually without urgency. She stopped at a crosswalk and waited, hands resting loosely at her sides. She was not fearless, but she was present. And presence, she realized, was power. Later, she told him about it, not as a victory, but as an observation. I didn't feel small, she signed. I felt real. He smiled, not wide, not relieved, just deeply. She saw something in his eyes then, a reflection of his own journey, perhaps. The slow understanding that control was not the same as care, that protection did not require ownership. They stood in that shared recognition for a moment, comfortable in the silence. Her life did not become easier overnight. There were still moments when memory ambushed her without warning, when a certain posture, a certain look, sent her pulse skidding. Trauma did not vanish simply because it was acknowledged, but she no longer interpreted those moments as failure. She had learned something fundamental. Strength was not the absence of fear. It was the refusal to let fear decide everything. She began volunteering cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Not as a spokesperson, not as a symbol, but as someone who understood how isolation formed and how devastating it could be. She met others who carried similar stories in different shapes, different languages, different scars. She listened more than she spoke, offering presence rather than solutions. She had learned that lesson well. The single dad watched these changes from a respectful distance. He did not insert himself. He did not monitor her progress. He let her life unfold without trying to shape it. And in doing so, he learned something too, that care could exist without control, that connection did not require constant proximity. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, his daughter curled between them, half asleep, her small hand resting trustingly on the woman's knee. The child looked up, eyes heavy with sleep. "You're strong," she said softly, as if stating a fact rather than offering praise. The woman smiled, not because she needed affirmation, but because she believed it. "I learned," she signed gently. That was the truth of it. No one had given her strength. She had learned it through pain, through choice, through the slow, deliberate act of standing up again and again, even when her legs shook. The night she and the single dad finally spoke about that first encounter, they did not romanticize it. They acknowledged the fear, the uncertainty, the risks taken on both sides. "I thought I was being saved," she admitted, "but I think I was being seen." He nodded. "And I think I was being taught." They did not label what existed between them. They did not need to. It was not a story of rescue. It was a story of alignment, of two people crossing paths at a moment when both were ready to unlearn something they had carried too long. She had unlearned invisibility. He had unlearned isolation. Together, they did not create safety. They recognized it. And then, crucially, they let it grow without trying to control its shape. In the end, the woman did not owe her survival to anyone but herself. She had chosen to stand when standing felt impossible. She had chosen to reach out when retreat was easier. She had chosen to remain visible in a world that often preferred her silent. And that choice, repeated, imperfect, deeply human, became the foundation of everything that followed. Not a rescue, a becoming. The night eventually faded into memory, the way all nights do. The room where fear once gathered returned to its ordinary purpose. Chairs were rearranged, floors were cleaned. People passed through without knowing what had almost happened there or what had quietly changed. But for the three of them, nothing was quite the same. The single dad no longer mistook solitude for strength. He still protected his daughter fiercely, always would, but he learned that protection did not require isolation. It required honesty, it required trust, it required the courage to let others stand beside him instead of behind him. In choosing not to look away that night, he had chosen a larger life, one that included uncertainty, yes, but also connection. His daughter grew, as children do, without ceremony. She remembered the night not as danger, but as a moment when staying mattered, when kindness did not ask permission, when her small hand, offered without fear, had been enough. She would carry that lesson forward, long after the details blurred, long after the faces faded. And the woman, she walked on her own, not untouched by what had happened, not free from memory, but grounded in the knowledge that she was not invisible and never had been. She did not owe her survival to a stranger's courage. She owed it to her own decision to remain present in a world that had once tried to erase her. Their lives continued separately, intersecting now and then, not bound by debt or destiny, but by recognition, by the quiet understanding that sometimes people enter our lives not to save us, but to remind us of who we already are. In the end, there was no single hero. There was a father who chose to stay, a child who reached out without fear, and a woman who stood when standing felt impossible. And that was enough, because some stories are not about rescue or triumph or perfect endings. They are about moments, small, fragile, irrevocable moments, when someone decides not to turn away. Moments that do not announce themselves as life-changing, but become exactly that. And long after the night had passed, long after the danger dissolved into distance, one truth remained. Connection, once chosen, never truly disappears.